on, you guys? I'm your host, Jennifer Tapiro. I'm here in New York City with another amazing guest. Joining me in the studio is J.R. Rahn. He is the founder of Mind Med. And it's great to see you joining me in New York to talk about psychedelics and helping to fight the opioid crisis and, of course, helping the next generation with mental health issues.
Yep.
JR, it's great to have you. What's going on?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Mind Med, mind medicine, psychedelics for the mind to help heal. Let's get right into it. How did this all come about?
Well, really, it started, I was a executive in Silicon Valley. I was an earlier employee at Uber. And then I went through the Y Combinator program in Silicon Valley. And I was exposed to actually quite a lot of folks that were microdosing psychedelics.
Interesting.
Yes, it was. And what I realized was there was some therapeutic benefit to these substances. And that maybe these could eventually one day be FDA medicines. So around 24 months ago, I really started digging in and meeting with most of the researchers that have been advancing the space over the last 15 to 20 years. And so I was in places like Switzerland, the UK, and also here a little bit here in the US. But a lot of that research is actually coming out of Europe, which is quite interesting. So what I realized was the researchers just didn't have the capital to conduct the trials at a scale that was eventually going to make these into FDA medicines. There was a lot of nonprofits like MAPS that had pushed the space forward for the last 33 years, and really, they're working in PTSD using MDMA.
Okay.
That's proving to be highly effective. But what I realized was there was a lot of other researchers out there that had some really great ideas, but didn't have the resources to undertake it. And so as a guy coming out of Silicon Valley, I was like, wow, these are clearly solutions to very big problems, potentially for the opioid crisis, for ADHD, for depression. They just need proper funding and the right teams behind them. So I set out to look for a team of researchers, a team of drug development experts that had experience with the FDA, to set up a company. And the mission of Mind Med is to develop medicines that are based on psychedelic substances. And we don't have a bias to whether that psychedelic substance makes you hallucinate or is non-hallucinogenic. And we can get into that because a lot of people, when they think about psychedelics, they think, oh, it's that acid trip from college, or, I took a bunch of mushrooms at my friend's birthday party. What we're starting to see is that these substances have been banned since 1970 when the Nixon administration made them a Schedule I substance. But psychedelics, the modern psychedelics, were actually invented in Switzerland 81 years ago by a guy named Albert Hofmann. And he was working at a pharmaceutical company called Sandoz Laboratories, which is now part of the pharma company called Novartis. And they were looking at LSD as for therapeutic reasons. They thought they could make it into a medicine. And what ended up happening was the 1960s, and obviously that unleashed a bomb upon the world, and ultimately governments reacted, and there was greater governance of these substances. So really there was no work really done post-1970. Starting in the 90s and then more in the early 2000s, there was more and more academic research that demonstrated these might be great solutions to big problems. And that's where we are now, and I think it's coming back into that realm where it's going to take biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies to develop and commercialize these and treat them as FDA-approved medicines. We need to seek out the approval of the FDA, and that's a really difficult task, and it takes a lot of resources. You need capital, you need research scientists, and you also need to be able to make these substances that are what we call GMP grade. It's not like you can just go out and grow mushrooms in a field. This is going to be very different than cannabis. We actually have to make these in a lab, We have to synthesize them. We have to have the right licenses to do that. And so we're doing that. That's what
Wow.
our company is. We work with very good partners to make these substances.
That's really interesting. Making psychedelics in a lab.
Yes.
I'm still trying to like wrap my brain around all of this. This is just, the internet has been heating up. A lot of people are talking about, are we going to legalize mushrooms? What's going on? I have friends in California that swear by, the medicinal healing benefits of mushrooms.
Sure.
So this was really a topic that I wanted to, touch upon because I think we really need to be educated on this.
We're solving really big problems. I mean, the opioid crisis is costing America $500 billion a year. Okay? The Fed chairman was on 60 Minutes saying it was one of the biggest economic threat to the country at the moment, not inflation, the opioid crisis. And there's 11 million Americans misusing opioid prescriptions.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. Uh, I mean, they're like 18 years old
Yeah.
taking these opioids. It's crazy, and who do we blame for that?
Well, I mean, the reality is that these were mismarketed to doctors, and
Right.
doctors misprescribed them.
I won't even take Advil. Like,
You won't take Advil?
I won't take any of that crap.
Okay.
Like, I'm really big into holistic, the more healing, more of the natural.
Sure.
If I don't feel good, I'm gonna take something that's more natural. Like I'm gonna have some lemon.
Yeah.
So how would you compare like the micro dosing of mushrooms, like on a holistic level? What do you think? What's the benefits of taking these medicinal mushrooms?
Well, microdosing is a really interesting space, and we actually set up a microdosing division. And
Oh wow.
so we will be doing some clinical trials of microdosing. The first of which will be the microdosing of LSD. And so we're looking.
Micro dosing of LSD?
That might sound crazy.
It sounds trippy.
But the reality is there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that microdosing LSD can increase your focus, maybe also increase your mood.
Okay.
There's been some studies done on it, but no one has really studied it in over a longer period of time to see what the effects are. And I come from Generation Adderall, right, where my parents brought me to a psychiatrist and they put me on Ritalin and Concerta and all of these medicines, and they really are, they're stimulants, they're addictive. And so there's a lot of people, mainly originating out of Silicon Valley, that are interested in microdosing. And quite a lot of folks out there are doing it. And so what we saw was, wow, there's this sort of illegal self-medication trend. Clearly something's working because people are doing it. But now we need to prove it with rigorous science and clinical trials. So we'll be going into a phase 2 clinical trial for microdosing this summer.
Wow. So what did 2019 look for MindMed? Like what exactly went on for you guys? I'm sure it's of course you said that you guys have been doing these clinical trials, you're building the company, you're
Sure.
creating different divisions.
Right.
What did 2019 look like for you guys now going into 2020?
So MindMed is a relatively new company. We formed in June. We actually purchased an asset from another company, which is our 18-MC molecule that's focused on the solving the opioid crisis, and it's really focused on opioid withdrawal and opioid addiction. So as an anti-addictive molecule, but I'll get into that in a sec. But just to come back is when I realized that I wanted to start this company, I knew that I needed a scientific team, and I needed folks that understood FDA regulations and could conduct these trials. So I found that in a co-founder named Stephen Hurst. And also he brought along his team, Dr. Scott Freeman, who has worked on many cancer drugs, and then also the inventor of our molecule, Dr. Stanley Glick, who was at Albany Medical College. So we were able to get their entire team to come into MindMed, and so they're full-time on MindMed now and co-founders in the company. And so we will be working towards a listing in 2020. We envision that hopefully in January or February, we'll be a publicly listed company in Canada and be the first publicly listed company in the world doing clinical trials of psychedelics. I think it's a big thing, and it's a new space, but there's just so much opportunity in it. We're solving really, really big problems here. And psychedelics could have the ability to transform a lot of mental health issues that we find across the world.
Okay, so we have people that might want to take psychedelics, like let's say a Friday night, like a party. How do we kind of separate, like, okay, MindMed is doing it for health and, to solve mental health issues and opioid crisis and
Hmm.
just healing benefits. You're working with scientists. How do we kind of separate that between like a guy that just wants to go out and party on a Friday
Right.
night and on a weekend? They're like, yeah, I'm taking psychedelics because I saw clinical trials were happening.
Yeah. So the reality is, and this is a really good point that needs to be made, and it's a great question. Um, we don't see a future in recreational psychedelics anytime soon. And our approach is that of clinical development and that these are medicines with therapeutic benefits. And we don't advocate recreational use of psychedelics. These are vastly different substances than, say, cannabis, for example. Um, but if used properly and in a controlled manner, it can be very effective in mental health issues. So the distinction that needs to be made, and I think you've seen a lot about decriminalization in Oakland and decriminalization in Denver, legalization efforts. Uh, our opinion as a company is that there's already precedent for psychedelics being approved by the FDA. There's a medicine drug called esketamine, which was approved by the FDA, I believe, in the second quarter of 2019, and it's part of the Johnson and Johnson group. So esketamine has some psychedelic effects, and a lot of people say it's borderline psychedelic, right? So there's already a regulatory pathway, and that drug is being used for treatment-resistant depression. It's being used to treat people that are thinking about suicide and getting them to not want to do that. And it's administered in a doctor office. I don't believe people should be taking esketamine home and using it on a Friday night. Like that's not the solution. And I really think we need to stay on the FDA pathway because that's very important. Because I don't want this industry to, these decriminalization and legalizations efforts to turn what we have as a psychedelic medicine renaissance into an apocalypse. And then for the next 40 years, we cannot research these substances because people wanted to use them recreationally. There are patients in need. There are opioid addicts that need help. There are people that are really, really depressed. There are veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq that have terrible PTSD. We cannot, sacrifice the opportunity that we have here for a recreational market. So we're not interested in that at all.
So what's going to be the marketing strategy for MindMed to get it to the people that really need these healing psychedelics? So how are we going to find those people? Like you said, right now our generation is suffering with depression, anxiety, mental health issues. Suicide is, I mean, there's so much going
Sure.
on right now.
Yeah.
How do we get it to those people that really need it? And like, are they coming to you, or how are you finding these clinical
Sure.
trials?
So, I mean, yeah, you make a very, very valid point. None of this stuff's approved yet, besides esketamine.
Okay.
We need to do some clinical trials. That's going to take some time. We're going into some phase 1Bs and phase 2s, and we hope that data is compelling enough that we can go to the FDA and get some approvals here for some big problems like the opioid crisis. And there's an urgency to solve that problem. So hopefully we will get some breakthrough designation status and these kind of things. And so, yeah, we'll be recruiting patients, not me specifically, but our clinical development teams. And
Right.
the goal is, you've got to get it approved, right? And then we can start thinking about how we market it. But to be honest, I don't think we're going to have to do much marketing. These are some really big issues. Mental health is definitely on the rise. Not just in the entire population, but it's really on the rise in young adolescents. It's crazy. Social media must be having some sort of effect on our mental health. So yeah, we will think about that go-to-market strategy
Mm-hmm.
as we grow as a company. But right now, I think our focus as MindMed is to build up the biggest portfolio
Mm-hmm.
of medicines that we can develop with using clinical trials that are based on psychedelics, and we really want to be the biggest player in this space.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of copycats of MindMed, like that are going to try and do exactly what you guys are doing, like the cannabis industry? You know, there's different brands that have
Sure.
emerged, and then there's copycats and people that
Yeah.
want to try and do it also. How does that work when it comes to like protecting what you guys are doing?
Look, the barriers to entry in this space are
Mm-hmm.
much higher than anything in the cannabis space, and I think that's part of the reason that it never really attracted the institutional capital. Well, clearly, it was illegal in the U.S., so that institutions couldn't invest. But um, we have to be able to synthesize GMP grade psychedelics in a lab. We have to do clinical trials. We need to have relationships with research scientists.
Mm.
These are really difficult tasks, and it's taken me 24 months just to wrap my head around it. And we have a team that's just fully focused on this. So will there be copycats? Yeah, there's always copycats in any good business. Um, do I think they'll be successful? I think it's going to be really difficult. There's probably two companies out there
Mm-hmm.
really right now that are what I would consider institutional grade investments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that will attract institutional capital. There's another company called Compass, which is conducting a phase 3 trial of psilocybin for depression, and then there's MindMed, and so MindMed again also conducting clinical trials. Other companies out there really just are not taking that clinical trial approach
Mm-hmm.
to psychedelics.
So you've attracted some really amazing investors, Mr.
Sure.
Wonderful.
Yes, Kevin
Kevin
O'Leary
from
is
Shark Tank.
he is an investor, and he's a big supporter of what we're doing. Um, People go, "How did you get Kevin O'Leary?"
Yeah, I'm like, you went on Shark Tank and pitched
No, we
psychedelics to
didn't go on
Kevin.
we didn't go on Shark Tank. I think we're a little farther along than that at the moment. But what Kevin saw was, you know, there's a opioid crisis is a big problem, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously he's quite in the U.S. quite a lot, and he sees it a lot when he goes around and gives talks and does interviews, and he saw that, wow, you're solving a really big problem, and if psychedelics might be the solution to that problem, I'm okay with it as long as you can do it at a federally regulated level through the FDA. I can invest. What he said he couldn't invest into was cannabis, and he couldn't invest into cannabis because it wasn't federally legal.
Hmm.
And so I think that, for us, is a big vote of confidence, but also I think it lines us up well down the line that institutions might invest into this space, and they will invest into this space because we will have federal regulation.
Wow. Mind blown.
You
I,
got it.
I'm really just like blown away from what you guys are doing.
Thank you. I think, in business, it's good to obviously build shareholder value and make a big company. But if we're doing something really helpful to society at the same time, that's also a good thing to wake up to every morning.
Wow. Just wow. I can't believe it. Psychedelics for healing mental health and the opioid crisis. Wow. 2020. I'm sure you
2020.
have a lot planned for MindMed. What's next?
So 2020, going to be a big year for MindMed.
Mm-hmm.
We will complete our listing very early in the first quarter, and that will obviously, I think I mentioned to you, we're going to be the first publicly listed psychedelics.
Publicly listed psychedelic company?
Yes, and we'll then look to bring in much more IP and clinical trials to the company because we really want to build this big portfolio
Mm-hmm.
and give investors and the best exposure to the space. Some of these things are going to work out, some aren't.
Mm-hmm.
We think by having a diverse portfolio, we will ultimately put medicines on the market. That's our goal. And so 2020 will be jump-starting all those clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just staying collaborative and open to, bringing people into the company. The way that we sort of look at this company is it's an arc, right? And we need to keep the food well stocked and the arc needs to float, and ultimately make people comfortable come on board, because we're doing some very, very groundbreaking scientific research, and the rate limiting factor in this industry is the scientific research.
Okay, so how is it going to be available? So you're doing the research right now. You have the clinical trials. You're getting the investors like Kevin from Shark Tank and people that are scientists, and you're putting the pieces together. Now, where is this going to be available for the consumer?
Well, it won't be available for probably, I think, on our opioid solution, opioid addiction solution. Hopefully within the next 2.5 to 3 years, it could be on the market. Again, it's subject to FDA approval. The reality is, FDA clinical trials take time.
Okay.
And that's a good thing. That's a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
That means you can build market exclusivity and
Right.
have a very sustainable long-term business. And so we're not going for the quick rush on this thing. We're building a real long-term business, and so it will take some time. But we plan to keep adding to the portfolio and keep building the value in what we're doing. So to answer your question in short, it's not going to be available for consumers so soon.
Okay.
But it is, with all things new, it will take a little bit of time. But I do see these solutions becoming medicines very soon.
So I'm a big cannabis supporter, and I've had my license for a long time. Is it going to be similar to that, where a doctor is going to have to prescribe you the psychedelic? Like what is the
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe 3 to 5 years. How will it work? It's like you have to go through different steps. You have to try this first, and then that's the next option. How is it going to work? Do you know?
So I think the reality is, there's going to be two treatment approaches. There's going to be hallucinogenic
Okay.
psychedelics, where you actually have an experience, and that's going to be supervised by a doctor and most likely another nurse in the room, or therapist. So you'll go to a specialized facility, most likely in a hospital, because these are, there needs to be good monitoring of them. And so it's probably going to happen in sort of these hospital-like facilities. And, it's like a 6 to 8 hour journey. You might stay the night, you might not, depending on how comfortable you feel. And that will be, prescribed by a doctor. You can't just show up there without having some sort of illness. Like, it could be for depression, or it could be for PTSD. It could be for addiction. There might be something there. With our other programs that we're talking about, 18MC and microdosing, we envision that those will be take-home medicines. So you actually go to your family doctor, and you would pick this up at your local pharmacy, all within the existing healthcare system.
Wow. I'm like, that's all I can say is wow. I can't believe that you guys are doing all of this.
Well, these are big tasks, and we definitely have a long journey ahead of us. But I think that's how you build very large and big companies, and so we're really excited to get the word out that what we're doing. We haven't really told many folks, because we want to make sure the plan was in place first, and we're very much on our way now. And I think now that we'll be becoming a public company, that's going to give us a platform to raise the necessary capital to really push these medicines towards the market.
So do you think becoming a public company is going to be very controversial right now?
I don't think it'll be controversial, because we're solving problems that face everyday Americans and Canadians, and everywhere. And let's not focus on the substance. Let's focus on the problem. And so if we focus on the problem, who's going to argue with trying to solve the opioid crisis? I don't know any politician that would. I don't know any person that's been affected by the opioid crisis that would. And I don't know anyone that hasn't been affected by the opioid crisis. It's a terrible disease, and we need to solve it.
There's a huge issue going on with our young generation. I mean, it's
massive. I mean,
massive.
It's and really, there's no frankly, there's no help in sight. That's the crazy
Right.
part. And we could have that solution, right? And so, one of the biggest problems with addiction isn't actually just sobering up for a few days. It's staying off those substances, and that's what our drug, 18MC, which is based on this psychedelic called ibogaine, we actually synthesized out the hallucinogenic effect. So you don't hallucinate when taking this medicine from ibogaine. And ibogaine was proven to, it's been proven to be an anti-addictive molecule, and there's a lot of research on that. But we said, look, we think if we can if we can take out the hallucinogenic effect of ibogaine, we can eventually get this approved. And so, that's going to take some time, and we, have a lot of work ahead of us with clinical trials and getting that application ready. But we hope that once we put that data in front of the FDA, we'll hope they would look favorably on it.
Definitely. Are you doing any clinical trials with any like rehabs right now, or people that are currently in that state right now and like that state of mind, like you said, that are fighting addiction and looking to help themselves?
We will be recruiting patients in for that. Previously, all the work over the last, we've been working on this, my co-founder's been working on this project since 7 or 8 years ago. And actually, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is a part of the federal government, gave the company, the project, $6.8 million. It was the first time ever that a substance that was based on a psychedelic got that type of funding from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And the reality is we need creative solutions here. And so we're looking to collaborate with as many folks as possible to solve this crisis.
And then is the plan to take it, like you said, they were doing a lot of research in Europe and stuff like that. Is that the plan, is to start right now at the U.S. market and then go to Europe?
So we'll be doing research all over the world.
Okay.
We will be doing research in Australia. We'll have some work that we're doing in Switzerland, and also here in New York. We plan to have a site as well. So.
Very, very interesting. I was checking out the website and I was just really, I was just blown away by what you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just really blown away, and then all the different people that were talking about it, and people that worked in the cannabis space that now have joined onto your company. And how do you feel about the cannabis space right now, and how will they react to what you guys are doing?
Well, the reality is we're very different than cannabis, right? It's two completely different skill sets. The folks that might have been successful in cannabis, will find the psychedelic space a very difficult arena to build businesses in. This takes drug development experts. Obviously there's some issues in the cannabis space, and I think for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned to you, we will attract institutional capital because we're federally regulated, and we are doing clinical trials, and we have high barriers to entry. We have a defendable business model. I can't say the same about a lot of cannabis companies, right? They didn't focus on the rigorous science. They didn't focus on the clinical trials. They rushed to market. And so when you rush to market, short term it looks great. But we're thinking about the long term. How do we help people, number one? We need to obsess over how do we help patients out there that are in need. And that's what we're going to focus most on. But also we need to focus on our shareholders and making sure that we create a business that we are the leader in, and so that's our focus.
So, okay. What's the end goal? Is it to help people? What is the
end goal? Is to solve the opioid crisis. That's number one.
That's the number one.
That's the number one, and I don't think you can solve it all in one day, but it will take some time. But if we can get a medicine on the market to help with opioid addiction, that would be a great initial achievement.
Definitely.
And then I think from there, there's other addictions that we'd like to look at. Cocaine addiction, methamphetamine addiction, alcoholism's a big one. Right? These are all brain diseases. There's something called dysregulation of the dopamine in your brain. So when somebody gets high, in our brain we have something called dopamine,
Right.
right? And so that's in the mid part of your brain. It's the pleasure center of your brain. And so when you get high, you get a spike in dopamine, right? And then shortly thereafter, the dopamine goes down. Again, it goes to a lower level. And over time, if you keep getting high and you sort of become addicted to these substances, what happens is the dopamine in your brain is going down to the floor, and you don't have as much dopamine there. And so you just get high to feel normal, right? And so what our drug 18-MC, based on the psychedelic ibogaine, does is it brings your dopamine level back up to the baseline, and it makes sure that you don't want to seek that high anymore. So it's a very innovative science, and it's looking at addiction in a completely different way than it's being treated right now. Right now, it's being treated as like a nicotine patch, like all these medicines out there, like Suboxone is like a nicotine patch for opioids. It's just giving you a little bit less harmful drug that makes you a little bit less high, but still isn't good for you.
Do you feel that doctors need to be like a little bit more patient with their patients and like give like more like like you said, like we're not going to solve the crisis. Like here's Suboxone. Do you think they need to be like a little bit more like, hey, like you should look into some other healthier healing options, like maybe something more natural? Like why is it that doctors now are just like, what, here, fine, just try this and hopefully you'll get better? Like how do you feel about that? Because I know people that were like addicted to opioids before, and that was just kind of like the doctor's like, here you go, out the door, bye bye, see you later. Like, and don't
Well,
you
look,
feel?
there needs to be a combination of support for the patient and medicine. Medicine is never just the end all be all, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're right. There needs to be a more holistic approach to this and how we treat people. But I think the medicine can be a big catalyst for that change in that person's life. But no, that needs to be backed up with many things, right? And it needs a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle change, right? Like
That's totally right.
It's a means of survival, frankly. And yeah, we need to look at addiction in a new light. And we need to not just addiction. We need to look at mental health in a
Mental
new light.
health.
And if you actually, I remember reading some statistic a couple weeks ago that 76% of Americans consider their mental health as important as their physical health. That's on the rise.
So I hope you really help people
Thank you.
with MindMed. And of course, you're doing a lot of clinical trials. You have some amazing scientists that are working with you. You have a beautiful end goal, and that's really to help people. And I'm all about helping people. So I'm really wishing you the best with MindMed. And of course, 2020 is going to be
It's a big year.
a big year.
Yeah.
Big year.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So, do you have a social media or anything that we can follow you on and follow the grind?
You can go to mindmed.co and all of our socials there, and also everyone can learn about our company.
And what about there's like a few takeaways, like what people should like take away from when they hear about MindMed?
We're solving big problems using medicines that are based on psychedelics. We're doing it through FDA clinical trials, and we're going to be the first publicly listed psychedelics company out there. Hi, I'm J.R. Rahn. I'm the founder of MindMed, and we are developing psychedelic-inspired medicines to heal the mind.